intelligence can be understood in objective terms for investment purposes. That is, how can we, the question I'm asking is, how can we understand the sorts of human and ethical issues that surround the application of artificial intelligence today? How can we understand that in an objective way, which allows people to consider the kinds of effects that artificial intelligence has when they make investment decisions? So that's the overall goal. To get there, what I thought we would do is first, we will look at a few cases of artificial intelligence ethics and human dilemmas. Some of these, I have the first one on the screen now. Some of these are sort of thought experiments. Others are real and occurring in the world right now. And then with that on the table, with a sense of the dynamic, we will move on and talk about how we could develop a structure for understanding these dilemmas in the second part. And then in the third part, what we will do is we will actually use that structure briefly to score or evaluate or survey or understand first a sort of a fictitious smart glasses company, and then we'll look at an issue from Tesla. So we'll have a fictitious case and a real case to see how this structure could work. So that's the big picture for what I have planned. Looking right here at this first slide, it seems to me that this is a very interesting case. That there have been several attempts to create smart glasses that have more or less failed. The Google attempt, the Snapchat attempt, I'm not sure how well that worked. There are startups. There was one I was looking at, Focals North, which I think has subsequently been purchased by Google. So Facebook is also developing some artificial intelligence smart glasses or augmented reality glasses. There are different ways of cutting up that distinction. What is important is the idea that it is quite easy to imagine with facial recognition technology put together with processing power and smart spectacles. It's quite easy to imagine a case like the one I have listed here. That is one where when you are walking around, your glasses can recognize the faces of the people you pass, instantly run them through a Google search, and you will know about everybody around you, which sounds terrific. That's almost a superpower you would like to have. But the problem is, of course, that if you do that, then other people will do that too. So this question about privacy and about what we reveal about ourselves, this is extraordinarily difficult to weigh or to maneuver in, given the way we usually think about the world. So we'll come back to that. Another question involves not privacy so much, but safety. This is a picture from what I believe is the first Tesla fatality. And in this case, it's really a horror movie type accident. The car mistook the truck that you see, mistook the side of the truck for the sky because it was cast off in a cloudy afternoon day. You can actually see from this slide how the side of the truck, white as it is, could almost appear as a cloud. So somewhat horrifyingly, the car did not even slow down. Literally right underneath the truck, shearing the top off the car. As I say, kind of a Hollywood fatality accident. And what is bizarre here, it seems to me, is this imbalance of power. Right? On the one hand, this machine, the autopilot, can calculate pi to perhaps 31 trillion digits. It's a bit of an exaggeration. It can do that in a long time anyway, but it can do those kinds of superhuman things. But then on the other hand, the car is incapable of avoiding an accident that even a 5-year-old would be able to avoid, right? Even a 5-year-old on a skateboard or on a board of some kind would stop before running into a truck. So there's a question here about safety. Then here we have a question about dignity. I think that this is like the Tesla case. This is a real and active debate that's happening now. There are these psychological chatbots that do help, especially the elderly who are frequently alone with depression. And there are some studies that indicate, not surprisingly, that these devices function better if those who are using them believe that the responses they are getting on their phone actually come from a real person. So on the one hand, it makes perfect sense to perhaps mislead the patient because there is a positive value to that. The patient is better, the patient's depression is better managed. On the other hand, unavoidably, there's kind of a manipulation there, right? That the patient is being told something that's not true, presumably for the patient's own benefit, but it's impossible to escape the reality that the patient is being manipulated or lied to. Another issue here also in artificial intelligence health, there is this question about explainability and how important it is that we understand how the, say, an AI-driven diagnostic tool, how it comes to the conclusions it does. I was working on a recent project with an AI startup, and what they were doing was they were using AI to analyze electrocardiograms, which are the waves of your heartbeat. And unlike in the Hollywood, where it's just sort of one up and down zigzag, the truth is an electrocardiogram is a set of large and small waves, which are all related in various ways. And this is a perfect application for artificial intelligence because there are so many small measurements that can be taken amongst these various parts of the waves. These measurements can be analyzed. And then if you have enough data, you can begin to identify patterns which are associated with coronary disease or impending heart attack. So in this case, the company is doing somewhat well at predicting future coronary disease or heart attacks. But because the diagnosis is built entirely upon correspondence and pattern recognition, the company is having a very hard time explaining why it is the machine is producing a positive or a negative result. So the question is, at what point do we demand that we understand why we are receiving a warning that we might have a heart attack? A human doctor might say, for example, that we have high cholesterol, or that they might notice something specific in our EKG waves that they can point out to us, that there's a weakness in one of the valves. But the AI machine, in this case, is pretty much just saying yes or no. So where is the line? How much information do we need before or how much certainty of a diagnosis do we need before we will say, I don't care whether I understand why I'm getting the diagnosis or not. I only care that I'm getting the right diagnosis. So this is another issue, and then this will be the last one we will look at. I think it's my favorite here. We can imagine LinkedIn, let's just take my case, for example. LinkedIn analyzes my academic and psychological profile and determines that I'm the kind of person who, let's say, does very well working by himself for long stretches of time. This is an extraordinarily important skill for someone who's an academic philosopher, as I am. I spend hours just reading a single paragraph, trying to get to the bottom of it. There's sort of an obsessive nature and a desire to work by oneself that fits my role well, right? So if LinkedIn knows these things about me, it will provide, or it could provide, ideally, let's say, it could provide very appropriate and gratifying job opportunities in one place or another. However, as I note here, if I feed this data to LinkedIn, right, it's also true perhaps that other companies will have access to this data. And therefore, the kinds of jobs that will be offered me will not only be gratifying and good for me, but they will be limited to that. That is, no company will want to hire me for the kind of job that demands people skills. So for example, I was reading there was an advertisement from a AI insurance company called Lemonade. They were looking for a fairness officer. And the description demanded that someone be, of course, as you would imagine in the tech world, enthusiastic, energetic, work with the team and all those kinds of things. Now, right now in 2020, I could write a letter to this company and say, it wouldn't be entirely misleading, but I could obscure the fact that I do spend a lot of time alone and let them believe that, at least during part of the day, I do well energetically and enthusiastically working in a team. But that kind of possibility, that attempt I could make to maybe, let's say, make a career change, that kind of possibility will be shut off to me. And not shut off because of some dark force that wants to obscure my potential or so on, but the opposite. It will be shut off to me because of how well LinkedIn is satisfying me, because of how well LinkedIn is orienting me and guiding me towards the kinds of professional jobs, the opportunities that fit my academic work history and my psychological profile. So it's a strange situation where you have what you want, but you're bound to it. You can't escape it. And then I note here at the bottom, it's easy to move that dilemma to something like Tinder, right? You are constantly matched with the kind of partner who you enjoy being with, but you can't try anything new. You can't escape that. So I'm not sure if that's good or bad. I'm not sure if that's positive or negative, but it's definitely an aspect, a human aspect, and an ethical aspect having to do with our autonomy, our freedom. It's an ethical aspect that needs to be accounted for if a company is going to understand well how their product will actually work in the world in the medium and long term. So that's what we're looking at doing in this presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about how the novel ethical dilemmas surrounding artificial intelligence can be incorporated into an investment strategy. That is how this information about these dilemmas can be presented to investors in a way that help them make decisions. Hence, the immediate question, well, why should financial professionals care about this? Why should they look beyond simple financial returns? For example, why do we care if Tesla is producing safety if they're making profits? Why do we care if LinkedIn is harming an individual's autonomy, an individual's ability to try new and different things? Why do we care about that if the users are happy and profits are going up? Well, there are two reasons, both having to do with this general truth that investment is increasingly driven by non-financial criteria. This criteria includes ESG investing, sustainable investing, responsible investing, ethical investing. In general, what these approaches have in common is that they add, or they seek to add, to financial reports. They seek to add the human and ethical element to the investor's understanding of a company. Now, traditionally, the way this has been done, to take the ESG case, for example, is through environmental, social, and governance concerns, and set those apart from financial concerns and say, let's look at companies in this other focus or in this other light. And what I am trying to say here is that the kinds of human ethical concerns that surround artificial intelligence are like ESG investing in the sense that they're humanistic, non-financial, but they are unlike ESG finance, ESG approaches, in that the kinds of dilemmas that we have surrounding artificial intelligence companies or companies that work with artificial intelligence at their core, the kinds of dilemmas are very different. And for that reason, we need this new structure for understanding the ethics of artificial intelligence that can then be used in a way which is parallel with, let's say, ESG reporting. And then quickly to wrap this up, there is some evidence that investors who incorporate the ethical and human aspects of companies into their decisions, there is some evidence that they have better long-term returns. And it is also certain that investors that understand these kinds of factors are more free. They have more opportunities in the marketplace to invest in those companies that cohere with their own personal values or the values of that asset class. A good example of this would be the Federated Hermes companies out of London. They consider themselves to be stewards of their investment portfolios. And what they try to do is not only get good returns, but they try to say that we will invest only in those companies which meet certain humanistic and ethical criteria. What I want to do is, in a certain sense, help them by presenting them with ways of using that kind of investment strategy, but as applied to strictly artificial intelligence companies, or companies that work with artificial intelligence at their core. Hence the title of this paper. AI Human Impact is the name I have for this strategy. And what we're doing is we're looking at AI, we're surveying AI intensive companies in human and ethical terms for investment purposes. So let's do that, right? How are we going to do that? The first thing we need to do is develop a set of principles or a structure for looking at these companies, as we need to have a structure for understanding them. And the good news here is that we have a lot of help. As noted in this essay here, this is from last year, I believe. There have been 84 distinct publications by serious academic institutions, private companies, research institutes, and so on. 84 different documents presenting AI ethical principles. This has been sort of the field of AI ethical principles has been sort of the Wild West for the last 5 years. A lot of different companies and groups presenting their own ideas, many divergent kinds of views. But what we have seen over the course of the last maybe 2 years, or even maybe just a year, is that we have come to focus on a set or a few sets of key and central principles. I have two of them here: the German Data Ethics Commission, and even more importantly, the Ethics Guidelines for Trustworthy AI, published by the European Council. More and more attempts to understand AI-intensive companies in ethical and human terms, more and more these efforts are now centering on on sets of theories that are very similar to the Ethics Guideline for Trustworthy AI. Now, you see next to the Trustworthy AI guidelines, you see those that I am using, AI Human Impact. And I believe that this set is just about as close as you can possibly get right now in late 2020 to a mainstream or central listing of the principles that are used by professionals to evaluate in ethical and human terms AI-intensive companies. Now you can see as you look across from the German Data Ethics Commission, they have self-determination, that's a word for autonomy. The Trustworthy AI talks about human agency, I talk about autonomy. And you can sort of cross the list for yourself, dignity, privacy, and so on. And you see that what I have in my list is almost identical to the other two lists, or sort of a combination of them. So for that reason, as I say, I make the claim that my list, AI Human Impact, is just about as central as you can get. I have two quick points to make about my list. The first is, for everybody who is doing AI ethics and AI humanism, privacy is extraordinarily important. And this is a good example of how different the world is from that of the ethics of traditional industrial companies. If you think of, for example, Henry Ford, who built the Model T, saying, look, you can have whatever color you want as long as it's black. Ford and the assembly line kind of industries, they had no interest in the personal information of consumers. They did not want to breach the privacy and personalize consumers, just the opposite. What Ford wanted and what is wanted by companies within the industrial economy generally is homogenization, not personalization. They don't want to know about individual consumers. They want to sell one thing to everybody. By contrast, artificial intelligence companies, or those who work with AI at their core, they function through personalization, not homogenization. So that's a critical difference and an example of why we need, in my opinion, a new way of talking in ethical and humanistic terms about AI-intensive companies, a way that just simply overlaps with, but is significantly distinct from traditional business ethics. So that's one point. The second point I wanted to make in this slide very quickly is about performance. The EC, the Europeans, they are not big into how well an AI performs. Why is that? Well, because these are academic and public institutions who generally understand the task of AI ethics to be to protect consumers from what can go wrong. That's not my approach. I want to protect consumers, but also I want the AI to work. I want it to serve consumers. So for me, how well an AI works, the performance, is an ethical criteria. A driverless car that works better than the ones we have now, that deserves a positive ethical score. Performance matters. So if you're going to be an investor, that key category, performance, should be included in the way you look at the world. So to conclude this, we have a set of principles for evaluation here. This is a structure for evaluating companies in ethical and humanistic terms when those companies function with AI at their core. What we can do is we can go through and look, and we can say, how well does this company do in terms of respecting human autonomy? How well does it respect human dignity? What does the company or the AI application do for privacy, for fairness, solidarity, sustainability, performance, safety, and accountability? Going through and doing that, measuring those things, is the way that we can develop an AI ethics score or an AI ethics map or survey of companies that would be useful for investors and also for consumers, for that matter, and people and users in general. Right? This is a way of understanding what these AI applications are doing to us, not just with us. Right? So how is this going to work? Well, let's go back to the first case that we had at the beginning. We talked about these glasses that could reflect the faces and then the information about the people near us that are step in the elevator with us. Is this person available romantically? Is this person have a job that could help me advance? Is this person dangerous, a criminal for some reason? This is the kind of information that we could have flashed into our glasses, as I say, when we step into the elevator with someone. And it seems to me that there are three to evaluate this kind of company. So this is just a fictitious AI startup for smart glasses. Next, we'll do a real company, Tesla, but let's start with this one. It seems to me that there are at least three categories that we should look at to grade this kind of company: privacy, performance, and autonomy. Now, privacy. What is privacy? Well, we know that privacy is control over access to our personal information. Privacy is the power I have or you have to share or not share information with others. The test I always use to make sure that people understand privacy is I say that Kim Kardashian is the most private person in the world. If you understand that, then you understand what privacy is. If privacy is control over access to your personal information, then someone like Kim Kardashian who shares it with everybody, well, that's privacy, right? She just chooses to share it with everyone. Most of the rest of us don't share so broadly. But regardless of how much information we share about ourselves, what privacy is the ability that I have, let's say, to control how much you know about me. And why do we want privacy? I think this is always important to note. The reason we want privacy is that so we can be someone and be someone else. What do I mean by that? First, for example, take my life with my children. The way I act with my children, the vocabulary I use and so on, would be somewhat embarrassing were I to act that way with adults. I think that's part of being a parent, right? You act with your children a certain way, which is not the way you act with other adults. There's a kind of goofiness and so on that you may use in certain occasions. Similarly, the way I act with my family and friends is very different from the way I act with colleagues. Now, acting in these different ways depends upon me protecting information about myself. The reason I can act the way I'm acting for you now in this talk is because I am hiding from you the way I act with my children. I am protecting that information. You wouldn't take me seriously if you knew those things about me. And the same would be true of any parent, right? All parents have a kind of goofiness that they express with their children. So privacy, the control over access to our personal information, is the way we are who we are and the way we become certain people in the world, the way I become a presenter at a conference or a colleague at a workplace or a father in a family. So that's why we want privacy. And what these glasses do, and this is why I have the little -1 down there at the bottom of the slide, what these glasses do clearly is they rob my ability to do that. If you all had those glasses and could see everything about me, a giant spreadsheet of every aspect of my existence, it would be very hard for me to present myself as a professional in the way I'm doing now. So there is this tremendous privacy loss that goes with the proliferation of these kinds of glasses. There's a tremendous human loss. If you see all these things about me, lose the ability to control who I am for you. So that's a negative score that has to be presented to or has to be attached to these companies and presented to investors when they make a decision about whether they want to invest money in a smart glasses startup. On the other hand, there's also performance. And here, +1. This is a thought experiment about the smart glasses startup. So we're assuming it works really well. And if it does, well, and that's a positive score. I mean, people do want to know about those around them. And it's certainly true that this could be very useful for individuals. If you get into an elevator and your glasses notice that this person is someone who is a violent criminal, well, that's good stuff to know. You want to hop out of that elevator quickly. Glasses that can tell you that are performing. They're doing what they should. So that also is extraordinarily important for investors to know. So when you look at this kind of company, this kind of AI intensive company, which is using artificial intelligence to report upon the people around us, and you want to draw up an objective measure of how that company functions on the humanistic level or ethical level, then you're going to say, look, in terms of privacy, that's a negative score, -1. In terms of performance, that's a positive score, +1. And then there's this other question, autonomy, my ability to make decisions about myself for my own life. Do these glasses help or hurt? I'm not sure. That's a hard question. On the one hand, they certainly help my ability to make decisions for myself if they help me hop out of an elevator before I'm trapped in there with a violent criminal. But on the other hand, if everybody knows everything about me, then it's much more difficult for me to do a presentation like this. So thinking about the proliferation of this AI technology within smart glasses. Does this serve human autonomy or no? I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but I am pretty sure that investors, let's say if a company like Federated Hermes was trying to make a decision about whether to invest a large pension fund in this company, they could pressure the company to help form an understanding about that. And they could pressure the company to report themselves about whether they believe and why that their product helps or hurts human autonomy. It seems to me that that's important information for investors to have. And an AI impact survey would provide that information. All right, so that's one example of how AI impact investing works. We locate we locate specific areas where human and ethical dynamics are very forceful, where the current is very strong and where people are being carried one way or the other. And we help investors understand what those currents are and how they're working in the world. The NM in this slide means not material. I think some of those other things might be material and depending upon how we look at it, but to keep things simple, we have performance well, privacy not so well, and then the question of autonomy. Now that was a fictitious case. Let's move on to a real case. This is Tesla. And there are two questions we could ask here from our list of 9 categories. They involve safety and accountability. As I noted at the start, what happened is that this car driven by the autopilot just went right underneath the truck, sheared off the top, Hollywood horror fatality accident. And Tesla, in lamenting this event, noted that there were 137 million miles where the autopilot was activated before there was one fatality. So it seems as though the autopilot in Tesla is doing better than human drivers in the US, where there's one fatality every 94 million miles, and better than the world average, which is one every 60 miles. But that's not enough for a human understanding of safety with Tesla. If we're going to have a human understanding of safety with Tesla, then we're coming to the end of my time here, I see, so we will have to move quickly. 15 to 12. We're actually at the end of the time. So we are at the end of the time. That went much more rapidly than I had thought. I'm sorry about that. But let me just say quickly, so for Tesla, we would want to talk about safety. We might want to say, look, how should safety be understood? On the one hand, we have the numbers, the risk. But on the other hand, there is this reality that artificial intelligence, as I noted this at the start, some things it does extremely well, but other things it does extremely poorly. And this is perhaps part of what needs to be understood when we talk about safety for Tesla. And so here's my report. We need to go forward quite quickly now because, as I say, I've overshot my time terribly. I'm sorry. The autonomy, that's a positive score for Tesla for sure, right? The car lets us do more with our lives. We can work on our work on the way to work because we're not driving the car. Performance is good, at least in some sense, right? The car does drive better than human beings, it seems. But what about safety? And I don't have time to talk about accountability. Perhaps in the question and answers. But what about safety? I think investors could demand a response from Tesla on that front. And what about accountability? So I also talk about these other issues briefly, but let me conclude. AI human impact. There are 3 reasons why I believe that this is an important step forward in the world of artificial intelligence, in the world of artificial intelligence ethics, and in the world of investing. It's important financially because I believe that outstanding returns will be yielded from investments that account for the human effects and the reputational, regulatory, and legal risks of artificial intelligence. It's important technically because I believe this kind of approach will in fact catalyze more and faster AI innovation. It will because it will help engineers and companies foresee areas of potential social rejection, like
James,
facial
sorry
classes.
to interrupt you. We have crossed the time. Like, can you please end it up?
Yes, and then so I've just in 20 more seconds, it will also help us map dilemmas and identify engineering that expands human potential, and it will increase the autonomy of investors. So for those three reasons, I believe AI human impact is an important step forward. Thank you for being here this morning.